On Friday, July 18, 2014, it was just another normal morning in Benton Hills. Just after 11 a.m., Florida State University law professor Dan Markel was on the phone with a friend, casually pulling into his driveway. But as Dan approached his house, his conversation was abruptly interrupted by something unexpected. "There's someone in my driveway, and I don't recognize them," he said. That chilling sentence was the last thing his friend ever heard from him. The line went dead. Moments later, across the street, neighbor James Geiger heard the loud bang. Looking out his window, he spotted a metallic Prius speeding away from Dan's house. Concerned about a potential break-in, Geiger walked over to investigate. What he found inside the running car was a scene of absolute horror. Dan Markel was barely clinging to life. The neighbor called 911.
911, what's your emergency?
We heard a loud bang and the car pulled away from next door. I came over and looked in, the garage door was up, and I thought the gentleman was backing out. And I went back to my house, but he never backed out. And I came back over, and his driver's side window was shattered, and he's spattered and can't answer. He's inside. I don't know if somebody tried to shoot him or if he shot himself or what. I don't know. He sent an ambulance in a hurry.
It initially looked like a tragic random robbery gone wrong, but James Geiger's description of that fleeing Prius would spark a massive investigation, one that would take years to uncover a cold-blooded, multi-state murder-for-hire conspiracy reaching into the highest echelons of a wealthy, powerful family.
He shocked all of us.
This is a terrible tragedy.
Police have yet to name a suspect in the case.
Daniel Markel was born on October 9, 1972, and grew up in Toronto, Canada, in a close Jewish family, the son of Ruth and Phil, raised with his sister Shelley, and from early childhood he was described as having a very energetic type of personality. By high school, that energy had sharpened into something intellectual, ambitious, and specifically pointed at the United States. He got into Harvard, undergraduate, and then law school. Between the two, he completed a fellowship in Israel, studying at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, and earned a master's degree in political theory at Emmanuel College at Cambridge. He graduated from Harvard Law magna cum laude in 2001. He clerked for Judge Michael Daley Hawkins on the United States Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit. He went into white-collar criminal defense at Kellogg, Huber, Hansen, Todd, Evans, and Feigl in Washington, D.C., and then in 2005 he joined the faculty of Florida State University's College of Law, holding the D'Alembert Professorship. He was 32 years old and exactly where he wanted to be. At FSU, Markel built the kind of academic life that other scholars describe with a mixture of admiration and mild disbelief. He was prolific. He co-founded Prof's Blog, one of the most widely read law professor blogs in the country, a place where substantive legal debate happened outside the journals, and where Markel served as a kind of intellectual gravitational center. While at FSU, Markel had met Wendy Adelson through a Jewish online dating platform, JDate, a law student at the University of Miami with a master's in international relations from Cambridge. He was 33 by then, and she was 7 years younger than him, also from a prosperous Jewish family in South Florida whose parents ran a dental practice in Tamarack. On February 26, 2006, they married at a lavish ceremony in Boca Raton, announced in the New York Times. Wendy moved to Tallahassee, joined FSU's law school faculty focusing on human trafficking cases, and in 2009 their first son, Benjamin, was born. Their second son, Lincoln, followed in 2010. From the outside, it looked like the kind of life people work very hard to build. Meanwhile, Wendy Adelson had never been happy in Tallahassee. She found it small, distant, too far from the family she had grown up inside. In September 2012, while Dan was away on a business trip, she packed the marital home, most of the furniture, the children, the contents of their safety deposit box, and left. No note explaining where she had gone, no indication when she would be back, or whether she was coming back. Dan came home to an empty house and found divorce papers left on the bed. He described it to friends as his Pearl Harbor. For weeks, he did not know where his sons were. He eventually learned Wendy had taken them to her parents' home in Coral Springs. She wanted to stay there. She filed for a divorce in September 2012. Dan fought back through the courts. He had legal rights, custodial rights, rights that kept Benjamin and Lincoln in Tallahassee and tethered Wendy to a city she had come to despise. The custody battle became a legal structure that the Adelson family could not easily dismantle. Dan's position as a co-parent in Leon County was the wall between them and the life they wanted for Wendy and her boys. For the Adelson family, Dan Markel was a problem. They tried to offer him money so they could have full custody, but Dan refused. He had also, by that point, found something he had not expected to find so soon: a new relationship.
And I said, "You have a girlfriend now? You're having fun in life again? You're smiling a lot. You have to start celebrating those things and walk away from this negativity."
He was rebuilding his life after a really, really difficult period. There is no way he could have known what was coming for him. Fast forward to July 18, 2014. After the incident in Dan's driveway, he was rushed to the hospital, but sadly, he died 14 hours later. His ex-wife Wendy was brought immediately in for questioning.
There was a shooting at your home, or your ex-husband's home, at 2116 Trescott. Okay. Your ex-husband, Daniel, all right, has been taken to the hospital. He's not going to survive.
Oh my God.
Okay?
Wendy expressed grief over Dan's death, yet one part of her interview stood out. She suggested someone may have killed him on her behalf, then directed attention to her middle brother, Charlie.
Something
Who
like
would
this?
do this?
I don't know. That's why you're here, and that's why we're talking. Would you ever ask someone to do something like this?
Not in a million years.
Okay. Do you think someone would do this for your benefit without asking you?
No.
What good does it serve?
I made my brother, his name's Charlie, the one I'm really close to. He makes a lot of jokes in bad taste, and it was a joke he made. He bought the TV for me this morning that got broken, and I was talking to him about whether it made sense to pay to fix it or whether I should get a new one, and it was always his joke that, like, he knew Danny treated me badly, and it was always his joke. He said, I looked into hiring a hitman, and it was cheaper to get you this TV, so instead I got you this TV. He would never.
Charlie Adelson, Wendy's older brother, the periodontist, with a history of professional malpractice. He worked in his father's dentistry practice and was close to his mother Donna and his sister Wendy. Turns out, by late 2013, Charlie was in contact with a woman named Catherine Magbonwa on how to get rid of Dan. Magbonwa was 30 years old. She and Charlie had been on and off for a period beginning around 2013. She was also the mother of 2 children with another man, a man named Sigfredo Garcia, who had gang affiliations in South Florida and a specific kind of operational knowledge that Charlie appears to be seeking. It might marvel you that the motive in this case was just geography. Not a financial dispute, not ideology, not a long history of violence or grievance that built over decades. The Adelson family wanted Wendy and her sons 500 miles closer to Coral Springs, and Dan Markel's legal standing as a co-parent in Tallahassee made that impossible. So they moved to eliminate him. What that means, specifically, is that Dan Markel's sons were the stated reason for his murder and the people most harmed by its execution. He died because he wanted to stay in their lives. They grew up without him as the direct consequence of that fact. The coverage frequently described what followed as a custody dispute turned deadly. That framing is technically accurate. It is also morally insufficient. What the evidence established across 5 separate trials and plea proceedings was a family that treated a father's legally recognized right to see his children as an obstacle and hired intermediaries to permanently resolve it. The distinction matters. Not a heated argument, not an impulsive act. A planned, intermediated, financially structured decision made at least 9 months before the murder to end the life of a man whose only leverage was a custody agreement he had fought to protect. His sons were the reason, and his sons were the ones left behind. Garcia, through Magbanua, brought in his close friend Luis Rivera, a long-standing associate who was at the time a known figure in the Latin Kings network in North Miami. The plan required more than one person. Rivera would come along. The financial structure was arranged at some remove from the Adelsons. Donna managed the administration of the family dental practice. Subpoenaed records from the Adelson Institute would later show that Donna had signed 44 separate checks to Catherine Magbanua. Regular payments from the practice's accounts. There was no job title on file for Magbanua, no work schedule, no documentation of any role she performed. The checks continued until April 2016. Garcia and Rivera made a reconnaissance trip to Tallahassee in early June 2014, arriving on the 4th, staying for the 6th. They had the target. They had a rented Toyota Prius. They stayed in motels, familiarized themselves with the route, and drove back to South Florida without completing the job. 6 weeks later, they came back. On July 16th and 17th, 2014, Garcia, Rivera, and Magbanua checked into Tallahassee motels again. The following morning was a Friday. Dan Markel woke up. He loaded his sons into the car and drove them to daycare, dropping them off just before 9 a.m. He then drove to Premier Health and Fitness Center on Maclay Boulevard. Footage from the gym and cameras mounted on a city bus route captured a green Toyota Prius arriving in the same window, following him in. At 10:38 a.m., Markel left the gym and drove toward Thomasville Road. The Prius followed. Multiple street cameras tracked both vehicles, moving through the neighborhood in the direction of Benton Hills. Sometime around 11 a.m., Dan Markel pulled into his driveway on Trescott Drive, still on a call with someone he knew. He said to the person on the other end, "Somebody's coming in behind me." The person on the line then heard what investigators described as a loud grunt, then muffled sounds in the background, then labored breathing. Dan did not respond again. An autopsy would confirm he had been shot twice at intermediate range, once in the forehead and once in the left cheek. A neighbor heard the shots and looked outside in time to see a Toyota Prius reversing out of Markel's driveway. Benjamin and Lincoln Markel were still at daycare. Dan Markel was rushed by ambulance from his Benton Hills driveway to a local hospital. He never regained consciousness. On the morning of July 19, 2014, he was declared dead. Approximately 90 minutes after the shooting, Sigfredo Garcia's phone records showed the first call he made. He called Catherine Magbanua. That same day, phone records showed a pattern. Magbanua and Garcia, back and forth. Magbanua and Charlie Adelson, multiple times across the afternoon and evening. That night, Magbanua went to Charlie Adelson's house in South Florida. She was there to collect the money. Charlie, she would later say, told her her parents had just left the house. The bills she received were damp, moldy, because, she said, Donna Adelson had physically washed them. Tallahassee police launched the investigation within hours, setting up a dedicated tip line within days. They had almost nothing to work from. Dan Markel had no enemies anyone could immediately identify. No valuables had been taken, no obvious motive was visible from the outside. What they had was the Prius. The car had been captured on multiple cameras. The vehicle had a SunPass transponder, an electronic toll tag that was at that time uncommon in Tallahassee. This was a detail from South Florida, from somewhere else. Investigators worked that SunPass lead for nearly 2 years. In 2016, the records led them to a rental lot in Miami. The Prius had been rented. Documentation placed it in the hands of 2 men, Sigfredo Garcia and Luis Rivera. Garcia was photographed at an ATM in Pembroke Pines on the day of the trip in a white long-sleeved shirt in the same vehicle. An unnamed witness told investigators about a meeting with Garcia and Rivera in a Tallahassee motel in June 2014, a month before the murder, during which Rivera was seen with a revolver consistent with the type investigators believed had been used in the shooting. By April 2016, investigators had assembled enough of the picture to know who was at the center of the conspiracy, but they needed something that would cause the Adelsons to talk, to generate new discussion over monitored lines that could be used in court. They sent an undercover FBI agent to find Donna. The agent approached her outside her Miami condominium. He presented himself as the brother of Luis Rivera, a man Donna knew was involved in what had happened in Tallahassee. He handed her a flyer, a printed news article about Dan Markel's murder, with the dollar amount written on it by hand, $5,000, and a phone number. "He helped your family with this problem you guys had up north. He's going through some rough times, and I want to make sure that you take care of what he's going through the way you're taking care of Katie and Tueto." Donna Adelson said she did not know what he was talking about. The first call she made after walking away was to her son. The following day, Charlie met Catherine McBenua at the Dolce Vita restaurant in Miami. A recording device captured the conversation. The audio initially was too layered, the restaurant too loud, the voices too close together to produce in court with confidence. It would take 6 years for the technology to catch up and the audio properly enhanced. The Adelsons had a private code word for Dan Markel's murder. They called it the TV. By the spring of 2016, nearly 2 years after the shooting, that shorthand was embedded enough in their vocabulary that Donna and Charlie could invoke it on a phone call without hesitation, reaching for a domestic object, a piece of furniture, to describe what they had arranged in Tallahassee. That is not the language of people living in fear of exposure. That is the vocabulary of people who have calculated correctly until that moment that they are beyond reach. The FBI's decision to approach Donna directly, to hand her a newspaper article and a handwritten dollar amount on a street outside her home, was designed to introduce for the first time the physical sensation of being found, of someone knowing. Donna's first call after the encounter was not to an attorney, it was to Charlie. The call pattern that followed, with Charlie then calling McBenua, then McBenua attempting to identify who the undercover agent was, then calls cycling back through the family, that pattern tells you something important about how this group operated, and for how long they had been doing so without consequence. Impunity accumulates. It changes the way people behave. By 2016, the Adelsons had been discussing the murder of Dan Markel in code on secured phones for the better part of 18 months. The bump gave investigators something to listen to. In May and June of 2016, Sigfredo Garcia and Luis Rivera were arrested. Rivera, already in federal prison on a separate racketeering charge, accepted a plea deal within months, second-degree murder, 19 years, in exchange for his cooperation and testimony. He described the structure of the arrangement, the rented Prius, the motel stays, the reconnaissance trip, the payment structure. He said the motive, as he understood it from Garcia, was simple:
The people who hired them wanted the lady to get her kids back. He said he had no idea they were going to kill anyone. Catherine McDonough was also arrested in October 2016, charged with first-degree murder.
The first trial kicked off in September 2019, 5 years after the shooting. Garcia and McDonough stood trial together. Prosecutors laid everything out: phone records, SunPass logs, surveillance video, Rivera's story,